samsara is being in samsara. I think Song Rinpoche mentioned this. Lama Zopa quoted Song Rinpoche in his book on how to face death without fear. Being in samsara is, you can either describe it as being going from one life to the next, locked into these cycles of rebirth, driven by the delusions. But the other the most experiential way of saying, if we're in samsara, it means we're caught up in these delusions. And to understand that concept, we've got to more and more we become familiar with the Buddhist view of the mind, which is the real topic for this topic. The more this makes sense, because when we first hear about delusions and afflictions, we kind of get very Buddhist. Oh, I've got afflictions, I've got anger, I've got attachment. But this is really a fundamental point that that actually marks Buddhism in a very unique way. Because, and I mention this often, and I'll say it again here. If we're on the Mahayana path, then the goal is to become a Buddha. Okay, but that word tells us exactly everything. So the word, the etymology of that word, and I've said this before, Bud, or the Tibetan equivalent, Sangye, Bud or Sang implies the complete eradication from our mind of all the delusions. I mean, this is such a shocking concept, so contrary to neuroscientific views, to modern psychological views, and to the views that we just have incorporated as the truth, because what we do in our culture, isn't it true? We give equal status in a normal person. As far as we're concerned, a normal person has some anger, some attachment, some fear, some jealousy, some love, some compassion, some intelligence, whatever, but that we give them equal status. There's no view in modern psychology, and certainly not in neuroscience, that suggests that you can utterly rid the mind of delusions and fears and ego. In fact, that's such a peculiar idea, we really can't imagine what a person would be like if you were like. But this is the point that Buddha's making. And it's very hard to hear this. It's very hard to hear it. And it doesn't seem almost possible because we so take for granted, we so buy into these fear-based states of mind. But that's why we need to learn, and the Buddhist analysis of the mind. And the real topic here in this second scope of practice, how to get out of samsara, go from samsara to nirvana, is about the mind, is the mind, And indeed, as Gina said it, and Isa said it, that the technology of samsara, how this helps us create samsara, and how we have to uncreate it, decreate it, deconstruct it. Because that's the job. I mean, don't hold your breath. It's going to take a while, if not a few lifetimes. But that's what underpins Buddhist practice. In fact, you could say, the first level of practice, like Gina said, the first scope of practice, or like I like to call it junior school, the very first entry level of practice is to abide by the laws of karma, to practice good ethics, at least to don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, etc., etc., etc. Now, that's common to any decent person on the planet. A good communist would be this way, a good Muslim, a good Jew, a good anybody. But so when you get to become uniquely a Buddhist, when you really get into the unique approach of the Buddha, that's when you get to the middle scope, I call it high school, which is what we're discussing here, which is how the mind works, which is looking into the Buddhist model of the mind. And as Lama Yeshe puts it, learning to be our own psychologist, learning to be our own therapist is not a joke. It's a marvelous statement, and it's utterly the point, Now, of course, speaking like that, being our own therapist, we then think, oh, that's interesting. I've got to talk about my problems to myself. I've got to talk about what mummy did to me to myself. I've got to talk about what daddy did to me and what the nuns did to me and blah, blah. Because that's how we think of psychology. I mean, I'm being a bit cliched. When we go to our therapist, what we do, isn't it? We go into the past to unpack and unravel what happened, all the events. We look into our genes. We look into our chemicals. We look into our brain. Now, Buddha has no argument with that. But that's a logical approach in our modern world's views, because that's where we come from. It's very clear we are a product of the external. We're a product of mummy and daddy, and then grandma and grandpa, and going back to the monkeys. So we track ourselves back that way. That's the past we try to look into. We look into the past when we were a child, what mummy was like and what daddy was like. There's nothing wrong with this. It's very reasonable to look at the conditions. It's a bit like if you're looking for the problem in the garden, you look at the soil, you look at the weather, you look at how much water, you look at the direction where the light is coming from. They're all the external conditions, aren't they? But we all know the main cause of the rose is not the water, is not the soil, is not the weather, it's the seed. So this is the analogy that for Buddha, the main cause for the Buddha of my anger, my depression, my love, my kindness, good and bad, the main cause is found in my own personal past of my own mind. And that means going back into karma, my past actions and what informed me from my own past, not mummy's and daddy's past. That's something else. That's like looking at the water and the soil. That's also valid because the conditions, they're called the conditions. They can activate. But the key thing is the mind. The key thing is the karmic seeds that are ripening in this life from my past actions. And the key thing then is to look at the delusions themselves and the positive states of mind themselves that are arising in my mind each moment. That this is the work. This is the work of being our own therapist. So it's very intensely personal. In other words, you can say, from the Buddhist perspective, you don't need to know what your mother did to you. This is a very interesting point and quite shocking from our psychological point of view, because I remember when I read the newspapers, when I read about crazy people or happy people or see movies about people, it's all completely rooted in the view that they're the product of the past, and in order to understand anybody, we have to understand what happened to them when they were children, But from the Buddhist point of view, you don't need to do that. This is quite shocking. You don't need to do that. The Buddhist view is almost so simple, we can't hear it. So in other words, there's the event, my boyfriend. There's the cake. There's the way I respond to the cake, respond to the boyfriend, respond to the weather, the way I respond to my job, the way we interact with others. That's where we learn to know about ourselves, isn't it? We see how we respond to things. So if I respond with jealousy, if I respond with depression, if I respond with kindness, of course, you don't go to your therapist if you're being kind. We only go if you're being depressed, right? But we see where's the problem? What is my problem? So we always look at the past. We know we're depressed. We know we're angry. But what we're trying to do is try and find what event happened that triggered me to get the habit of being angry. And that's perfectly valid. My father might have beaten me. That could be a very valid thing to look at. That's when Robina learned to get angry. But the simple point we're missing, and this is the Buddhist point, is that I came into this life, one, with the karma with that daddy to be beaten, and two, with anger. So in other words, the Buddhist view, forget the karmic one even. Forget even the karmic one. The most direct, powerful way to be our own therapist, this is the essence of daily Buddhist practice. This is the essence of it, is to look at the anger itself. That's it. Don't worry about what daddy did. Don't worry about my boyfriend. So in other words, there's the event, the boyfriend being mean to me, and then there's my anger, which is the response to that mean action. We obsess about the mean action, and we're right. It's not correct that my boyfriend is mean to me. Buddha would agree with us. That's wrong ethics. He was mean to you. So first of all, karma explains that. But forget the karmic one. Now we look at what am I going to do? Where do I learn to, how do I work on my mind? I have to listen to my anger. That's the work. It's so direct. It's so almost too simple. We can't hear it, because we're so used to the narrative. But yes, I know I'm angry, but look at why. So we want to look at the why out there. That's the obsession we have, because that's our habit. So this other job of, there's my anger, let's analyze it. That's the job of being a Buddhist. That's being your own therapist. That's the actual work of being a Buddhist. That is the actual job of being a Buddhist. It's so direct. In a sense, it's almost so simple. It's not complicated, but it's the hardest job we'll ever do because we're not familiar with it. It's very fascinating to hear this. It's really, really fascinating to hear this. This is the job. So let's look at, using karma as well, let's look at the analysis we would do. Take a simple event. Take the simple event of the boyfriend being mean. And this simple event, casual, ordinary daily life, someone's being mean to you. So let's analyze the response we'd have, the typical response of an ordinary samsaric person. As soon as whether it's the boyfriend or the next door neighbor, or whether it's the guy on the freeway who toots his horn at you. Think about it. what is the first thing that arises in most of us, normal, would be anger, isn't it? How dare, who does he think he is, this guy on the road? What are you tooting your horn at me for? Sort of thing, isn't it? We'd have that. So let's do a Buddhist analysis of this. So in this case, let's forget the karmic one. No. Yeah, let's just look at the mental one. Let's just look at how you'd work with the delusions. So if we take the three poisons, this cute phrase of Buddha's, I've got the three poisons. You don't go to your therapist, I've got the three poisons, he'll shut up and go home. The three toxic emotions, I like to call them that. It's more intense, isn't it? What are they? I mean, understanding these three, I swear to you, you'll have a profound understanding of your own mind, and indeed everybody else's mind. This is very shocking to us from the psychological materialist point of view. It seems ridiculous, We don't have an analysis like this in the modern psychology. We just don't have it. Let's look at Buddha's analysis. And often this is a tragedy. We say we're Buddhists, but we keep doing the other analysis. And it's okay, you can use Jung's analysis if you like, but we keep that sort of real psychology for us. This is just being a Buddhist, Oh, I've got the three poisons. We don't look at it, we don't even analyze them. We don't know what it means. We don't unpack them. This is the job of being a Buddhist, people. So let's do the little analysis. So let's just do the one of the boyfriend. It's more usual. The boyfriend, the mother, the close person who's mean to you, So the typical response of a normal person is to be angry, to get, always call it polite. We'll be polite. We'll say upset, annoyed, irritated. You'd be angry. You get hurt. That's what we'd say. You feel hurt. Well, what's that? That's called anger. So what's anger? The bare bones state of mind that informs anger. Anger is a more volatile expression of aversion. Aversion is like the fundamental state of mind, okay? So what's aversion? Now, what's aversion? So we have to look at the second poison. There are three. There's a hierarchical relationship. The root one is this powerful misconception of an intrinsic me. This is so subtle, so pervasive, so totally taken for granted that in modern psychology we don't have a name for it, But this is the Buddha's view. So that's the root. That's the root of the problem. But on the basis of this primordial assumption of this unhappy little kind of bereft, lonely, separate, concrete me, then on the basis of this, the one that arises immediately all the time is the next poison called attachment. We talk often enough about it. There's this emotional hunger basically to get what that supposed I wants every millisecond. It's that primordial. It's that deep, okay? So the attachment is the main voice of the assumption of this ridiculous, wrong, non-existent I. So the attachment, of course, because you have a sense of a separate I, that's one of the main functions of this ego grasping. The colloquial term we use for the root delusion, the first one, is an assumption of a separate I, which is not comfortable, which is fear-based, concrete, set in stone, miserable. So naturally, because you're feeling separate and miserable, that gives rise to this next one, which is this emotional hunger that's called attachment. And it's constantly there. It's always there, just as an assumption, deep in our bones. The assumption is, this assumption of this attachment every second is that I must get what it wants every second. In other words, it only wants the nice things. Attachment is a junkie that only can cope with everything being nice. So then when it doesn't get it, that is when the boyfriend is mean. The third one is triggered, which is called aversion. Like instantly, attachment is kind of like hungry to greet something. The boyfriend says a lovely word and you kind of absorb into it. Oh, that's so delicious, and you eat it up for breakfast. Attachment just got what it wanted. But the second the unpleasant word comes, the suffering is caused by the aversion, but that's merely the response when the attachment didn't get what it wanted. So aversion is the response to when attachment doesn't get what it wants. This seems so shocking to hear like this because we think it's normal. But of course I get hurt if someone's mean to me, we'll say. And it is normal, but it's normal because you have aversion, attachment, and ego grasping. If you were out of samsara, if you didn't have ego grasping, you would not have attachment. If you didn't have attachment, you couldn't possibly have anger, and therefore you couldn't have all the other dramas. You'd be this radiant, blissful, joyful, happy, fulfilled, content person for whom another person's mean words is water off a duck's back. We've got to understand this. But it's too shocking for us to hear this. We can't understand it. It doesn't seem normal to us. But this is the Buddhist analysis. So why do you get angry? Because attachment didn't get what it wanted, petal. But don't be mean to yourself because of it. Join the universe. This is called samsara. This is samsara. So in other words, the analysis you do if you're trying to be a good Buddhist, sure, the boyfriend was mean. We all agree. Tick the box. He was mean. That's his issue. This is too hard to bear. That's his problem. What's mine? Buddha's saying. But we go to our therapist and we talk about our mean boyfriend, so she supports my right to be angry because it's wrong to be mean. That's the analysis we use. So we defend our right to be angry. We don't do the analysis internally at all. This seems so brutal for us. But this is being a Buddhist. If you hear Lama Zopa's words for the last 30, 40, 50, 90 years, this is all he's ever saying, but we can't hear it. It's very fascinating, you know. It's utterly fascinating. If you look at the Dalai Lama, if you think of the things that have happened to him and his people in the last 70 years since he took on the job of running Tibet. He took on the job of running Tibet at the age of 15. Okay, he's now 85. For 70 years, can you see look at the abuse he has been receiving from the Chinese communists. Please look at it carefully. And can you not see he's this happy, funny fellow? So is that not should we not be saying, well, I wonder what the Dalai Lama's done all these 70 years to be a happy fellow? Because if my boyfriend's mean to me and I'm having a mental breakdown, and, whereas for Tibetans, for the 70 years of Dalai Lama, the country being destroyed, his people being destroyed, still being destroyed, everything, and he's still a happy fellow. I mean, we just go, oh, that's just the Dalai Lama. Well, it's completely insulting. It should be mind-boggling for us to think, well, I wonder what he's done to make him like he is. Perhaps I could do it too, but we don't join the dots, I'm allowed to be angry. My boyfriend was mean to me, we say. I mean, we shouldn't be, I always sound so brutal when I talk, I know that. But we've got to hear it clearly, and this is simply telling us the methodology. So if anger arises in my mind, the main cause of it is the underneath one, the one beneath it, which is attachment. So if I didn't have this constant emotional hunger to get only what I wanted every millisecond, then it would be impossible to experience aversion. It would be impossible to experience anger. So when we understand this, these are simple words, this is not complicated. You've got to look into the past and unpack so many things and events, and it's really complex for us, the modern psychological view. This is so simple, technically, but impossibly difficult because we can't hear it. Because our view is completely different. Our analysis is a total another analysis, and ego doesn't like this view. It's too painful, This is being a Buddhist. Every second of the day, learning to recognize in the mind which delusion is speaking, What is the thought that my mind is saying? So analyze it. So let's analyze now these words that these thoughts say. Because underneath the emotion of anger, the hurt, the heart beating, the pain that we feel almost physically, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just the emotional component because of the habit of having deeper in my mind the habit of the conceptual story of anger. Now, what does anger say? It says, how dare he do that to me? I don't deserve it. This, I think, is the primordial response of anger. The gut feeling of anger is, it's shocking that happened. I don't deserve it. You think of this one now. Think of this one. Now, this is where karma comes in. This is where you use karma and the delusions. If we look at the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha's assessment of 1, there is suffering. 2, there are causes. 3, you can stop the suffering and its causes. 4, how to do it. So the second one, there are 2 causes of suffering. This is too ridiculous for our mind. I mean, the complexity that we need to understand just to analyze the simplest physical problem, because if we look at the physical, is enormous. But if we look at the mental one, which is karma and delusions, there are 2 causes: past action and present delusion, or past action that informed that action, the delusion, and then how we look into this now. So we take this analysis of karma and the delusions as being the cause of my suffering, not the boyfriend. He is a cause, but he's a secondary cause. There's no argument he's a cause, but he's a secondary cause, not the main one. So nothing wrong with asking the boyfriend to stop. Nothing wrong with that. But it doesn't get to the root of the problem. We want to get to the root of the problem, don't we? So this is the analysis. So I'm trying to be a good little Buddhist. Boyfriend is mean. Okay, I maybe have a little weep, or I stomp out of the room, and then I sit on my cushion, and I'm going to do my analysis now. I'm going to be my own therapist. So what do? Well, let's look at anger, Robina, and hear the storming in the mind. It's not fair, feel the hurt. It's not fair, how dare he do that to me? It's not fair, he's always doing that. And so you start to question that assumption. It's an assumption, isn't it? How dare he do that to me? I don't deserve it. That's a statement of the mind, isn't it? The mind is saying that. How dare he do that to me? I don't deserve it. Well, right there, you pick up karma. Where's my argument with this? I have to debate with it. I use wisdom to debate with that concept. And I will discover immediately it's a wrong concept. It's not a valid concept. Because karma takes care. If anything happens I go back to karma, junior school, and I say to myself, well, karma, what was it about karma again? That's right. If anything arises in my mind, and whatever ripens, an experience ripens, then the main cause of it is an action I did in the past. So yesterday my boyfriend was kind to me, I'll say to myself. And I was delighted. Well, I deserve that, because I must have created the cause by being virtuous. So if I created the cause yesterday from my past virtue, he was kind, and then that triggered a happy feeling. That happy feeling is the fruit of my past virtue. Well done. So today, what happened is an unhappy feeling. So then I say to myself, how dare he do that to me? I don't deserve it. That's a wrong analysis, Robina. It's a wrong analysis. It's like saying 1 + 1 is 3. It's just not true. I must deserve it. If I deserve the good one yesterday, well, this is my garden, and they're all my weeds, and they're my flowers. I planted them. So if I planted it, therefore there's no choice. It must have happened. I created it. So the main one of karma is I created it. Yes, the boyfriend hit me. It's true. He did do that action, but I created the cause for it to happen. So then I argue with, how dare he do that to me? I don't deserve it. And I realize it's not a correct assessment. It's a wrong analysis. So I practice having the right analysis. Now, of course, because I'm habitually caught up in the wrong analysis, it won't change my feelings overnight, but I work with it and I attempt to accept it and take responsibility. Now, the other way to look at it is that anger, like I said before, that anger comes because of the deeper assumption. This is the point. The deeper assumption of attachment says, I only deserve the good things. That's what attachment is saying. Attachment is a junkie that assumes that I only ever deserve the good things. So when he was kind to me yesterday, I ate it up hungrily, didn't I? And actually attachment is thinking, well, of course I deserve good people to be kind to me. We all think this is a truth. Analyze this. This is very fascinating. This should blow our minds. Attachment believes that I only deserve good things. We only feel we deserve good things. I deserve to be happy, we say. I deserve people to be kind to me. This word deserve is we use this word actually. It's a heavy word. It's kind of heavy. I don't deserve it. I do deserve it. Analyze this carefully, people. If you look in your garden in your backyard and you grow the veggies and you grow the flowers and it's your garden. Hear this point. You would never say, if you walk out in the garden and you see a weed, you would never say, who put a weed in my garden? I don't deserve it. Why not? Because you know why? It's your garden. This is a very powerful point. You never look in your bank account and say, why are there no dollars in my bank? I deserve dollars. You never say that, because when you say deserve, there's an assumption it's got to come from the outside, isn't it? There's an assumption that other people should be kind to me and that other people shouldn't be unkind. So you'd never have that about your garden because it's your garden. So who are you looking at? Who planted the seeds? Who planted the weeds? Who planted the flowers? I did. So you don't say I deserve or not deserve. You take responsibility for them. Look at the weeds. I didn't pull them out. You don't say who put weeds in my garden? Looking around everywhere else. You don't say where are the dollars? I deserve dollars. Think about this. This is really quite profound. But these are the assumptions of attachment and aversion. And there's like this hubris, there's like arrogance, this self-centeredness that we think that we have to do nothing and then everybody should be kind to us. You've got to create the cause for anything. We know that in daily life. You can't say, I deserve dollars. Where's the dollars? You've got to earn the dollars. You can't say you don't deserve the weeds. They're your weeds. So our life is our garden. Whatever's in it, we put it there. And when we own this, when we start to apply karma, then we will start to accept. This is the point. Whatever happens, we will delight in the good things. We will never just take them for granted. We would not have this hubris of assuming I deserve good. That would be arrogant. You'd be happy every time someone's kind to you. You're so delighted. It's like, you every time you go out to your veggie garden, you find another cauliflower and another rose growing. You never take it for granted. You remember the hard work you did to earn that cauliflower, and you will treasure that cauliflower, and you'll enjoy it, and you'll delight in your hard work, and you know what? You'll make sure you grow another one. But attachment just walks out and says, oh, I deserve cauliflowers. Give me more. The arrogance of it, actually. And this attachment and aversion are rooted in ego grasping. That's the point. They are rooted in the deepest misconception of a separate, concrete, uncaused, set in stone me. You know? I mean, when we analyze these delusions, it sounds quite heavy talking like this, but this is how they think, deep in our bones. And these are why we suffer. These wrong assumptions, these misconceptions. It's so intense to hear this, So analysing like this is the way to practice, to the best of our ability, to take responsibility. And that then makes us grown up. Then next time the husband is mean, the boyfriend is mean, it doesn't hurt so much because you learn the irony. The interesting point about it is the more you think about your karma and the more you think about your delusions, the more you own them and then want to change because they're not set in stone, the more empathy it gives you for your boyfriend because you realise the poor guy's caught up in his own anger and he's ridiculous with his own ego grasping, and you start to have a bit of compassion, But this is intense. You don't need to remember what happened to you when you're a girl. I was born with anger. My mother didn't have to teach me. She didn't have to teach me. I knew how. So naturally, having attachment to get what I want and then getting angry when I didn't, that explains why I had dramas when I was a little girl. That explains it. Okay, if my father did harm me and my mother was kind to me, karma explains that. So karma explains why things happen, and then your mind explains how you respond to them. This is the Buddhist analysis. It's intensely personal. But we have to learn Buddhist psychology first. I mean, I'm just not making up these words, I promise. This is from understanding Buddhist psychology even a little bit and trying to practice it all these years. Seeing our mind, unpacking our own mind ever more deep, layers upon layers upon layers, seeing these assumptions at ever deeper levels, ever deeper levels, ever deeper levels, and how there's this intimate relationship between these three delusions, these three poisons: ego grasping, the assumption of an I, attachment to get what the I wants, and then panic attack when it doesn't. And then all the other delusions are rooted in these three. It's a very interesting map of the mind, This is the way to be a Buddhist every second of the day. And like any job, it's hard in the beginning, but like any job, you get used to it, So what's the consequence of working like this? The consequence is you become less victim, less hurt, less attached, less needy, more fulfilled, more joyful, more content, and naturally more empathetic and more kind and more wise. That's the fruit of practice, That's what we want. We want to be more happy. This is how Buddha's method to get happy. Buddha's method to get happy is to change your mind and abide by the laws of karma. That's the point. These are not complicated concepts. It's just that it's opposite to what we think, that's all. So ask me some questions about this.
Mary Jo has the first question.
Good, Mary Jo, talk to me.
So last week when you were talking about the 3 poisons of the mind, and you were talking about the first one, the ego grasping and the ignorance, and you talked about fear.
Yes, that's right.
And that really got me because I have lived with a lot of fear.
Yes.
And I always, every time fear would come up, I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm clearing a karma. I must have done something. And so I'm feeling this fear because, I'm like, okay, I try to rejoice, like, oh, I'm clearing it.
Good.
But
well,
then
good.
when you were talking about fear last week, it made me think, oh, maybe there's something more.
I understand, Mary Jo, are you? Mary Jo?
Yes.
Okay, good, darling. So listen, I mean, the thing is, it's the point, it seems so strange to say it this way, but this is the Buddhist reason why the ego grasping, the root delusion, the most primordial, the most subtle, the hardest to hear, and the hardest to uproot. That's why we've got to work on the branch delusions first. Here in high school, in the middle scope, we're working on attachment and then aversion and the others. Later on, when we get to the 6 perfections of the Bodhisattva, we'll then start to work on the root delusion by realizing emptiness, okay? That's the root one. You've got to chip away. So, the point is, when we start to realize this Buddhist view that all the delusions, all the misconceptions, all the delusions, all the afflictions, all the unhappy states of mind, all these neuroses, all these different words you want to use for attachment, anger, jealousy, the root delusion, ego grasping, pride, there's many, many, many of these that are the unhappy states of mind. So they're all branches of the root, which is ego grasping. In other words, if you've cut ego grasping, then there would be none of the others. If you've cut attachment, there can't be anger. If you cut anger, there can't be the other ones that are branching from that. They've got this intimate relationship with each other, So the thing is, when we start to understand the Buddhist psychological model, how these unhappy states of mind have first of all, the characteristic of being very disturbing and unhappy and painful. Then we're going to understand that the subtler level of them, that they're actually misconceptions. They're all literally conceptions in the mind that inform these emotions, and they're the only things we're usually in touch with, the feelings, when the body's involved. But the more we become familiar with our mind, it can unpack and unravel and go beyond the physical component and get to hear the conceptual story that attachment is saying, that anger is saying, that jealousy is saying, that eventually ego grasping is saying, when we're going to realize they're all literally misconceptions. Like I said about anger, they're literally misconceptions. Now that is why they're rooted in fear. This sounds so peculiar, but if you think of a simplest example, that you believe every time you see that $50 note, every time you see a $5 note, you believe, you've convinced, believe totally it's worth 50. So in other words, you've got a misconception. Reality is it's $5. So you believe it is 50. Therefore, you have all the expectations that when you go to spend it, that you will get $50 worth. So every time you go to spend it, you get hit in the face because your expectations are not met. And so you're disappointed and you freak out. So that's why we have fear, because we believe there's an intrinsic me, but there's no such thing existing. We act upon the reality. We act on the belief of an intrinsic me. Attachment is the voice of the intrinsic me. Attachment is a liar. Then attachment doesn't get what it wants. Aversion arises. It's a liar. All the delusions that come from those, they are all misconceptions. They are all liars. So every time we act through those, which we are doing all the time, that's what being in samsara means, we're bumping up into reality, so we always get disappointed, and we always get hurt, and we always get upset. So they're rooted in fear because we're believing in lies. So when you've uprooted all the delusions, as the Lamas say, there is no fear. As Lama Zopa, that story I always tell about when he was a little boy, he'd been recognized as a reincarnation since a little boy, and he's in a monastery up in the mountains. He's 8 years old, and there's a big river, and he sees these weird looking people on the other side of the river, these pale faced people with pale eyes and straw coloured hair, white people obviously, and he wanted to meet them. So he went across the bridge, and this rickety bridge with his bowl of potatoes, to meet these white people, and he fell in the river. Well, the whole story, how he tells it, You see, he was recognized in this life as the reincarnation of a meditator in the past life, which means he's chosen his rebirth, means he's realized emptiness, which means he's cut ego. And you can't, once you've done that, you can never lose it. Ever, ever, ever. Once you've cut the ego grasping, once you've realized there never has been, isn't, and never could be that kind of I, you've realized emptiness, and you can never go back after that. You can only go forward. So assuming he's done that, then he is 8 years old, he's drowning. He fell in the river with his potatoes, and he's drowning. And how he told the story, he said, the head kept coming to the surface. Not I came to the surface for air. The head. So anyway, the point is, he then said to himself, the thought occurred to me. The person known as the Laudo Lama is about to die, he said to himself. And then he said to us, telling the story, I didn't know anything about emptiness, but there was no fear. And this is the thing that's hard to hear. Fear for us is the most normal. We don't even think of the word fear. It's only when you've been really run over by a car or some shocking thing happens. But all the delusions, because they're rooted in the fundamental misconception of an I that never has and couldn't and doesn't exist, we live in fear. Daily, ordinary. Anger is just a complete panic attack. Jealousy is a panic attack. Depression is a panic attack. Anger is a panic attack. Attachment is, they're all panic attacks. We are living in fear to one degree or another. And because it's so normal, we only think fear is when you nearly get run over by a car or your heart beats too fast. But we're rooted in fear. We live in anxiety and worry and fear. It's the nature of all delusions because they're liars. Are we communicating, Mary Jo?
Yes, I appreciate this very much.
Good. This is what being samsara is. We live in fear, but everybody on the planet is. Look at people's faces. Look at people's. We all. And the biggest fear. The lamas even say, even the bodhisattvas have such compassion for us. Forget about realizing emptiness, because we don't realize emptiness is the root delusion. But just the fact that we don't have a view of cause and effect, that we all have this concrete sense of a separate self who's an innocent victim to whom bad things happen unfairly, and to whom good things should happen. We're constantly panicking, wanting the good things and panicking about the bad things happening. We live our lives like that. Everybody does. We should just weep with compassion for all sentient beings, because this is how we're all living, all insane, out of our brains, every one of us. And this is we first have to realize this for ourselves. Then we can have compassion for others. You can't have compassion for others at this level until you know your own suffering, until you're vomiting at the thought of this garbage state of mind. You're so sick of it. It's like kindness to ourselves, not beating ourselves up, not guilt. Unbelievable compassion for the suffering of these crazy delusions, you know. Mm-hmm. One step at a time. So fear is good. It is good because every time you have it, it is purification. You're right, Mary Jo.
Oh, well, that's good.
Of course, any moment of a delusion that arises, any moment of suffering that arises is purification. Of course it is. That's why we be brave. So when we're really brave, and you've made that, you've decided to live with this man, and this is the key point. Instead of being this victim, I wish he didn't hit me, but you've lived with this guy. You've decided you're going to live with this fella. You've accepted him warts and all. So every time he's mean to you, it's great. Bring it on, babe. That's really the highest practice of all. Then you're not foolish, you're not ridiculous, you're not a victim, because you're wise and you understand where this is coming from, and it's all grist for the mill for your practice. This is when we really get advanced, Are we communicating?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you. What else, people?
Two more questions lined up. Sam is next.
Okay, talk to me. Who's there?
Hi, Venerable Robina. Thank you for the teaching.
Hello, Sam. Good, darling.
I have a question about karma.
Yeah.
I understand, for example, if I don't like my job or my house or my car, I can do the analysis and see that I'm the one who planted those seeds. I'm the one who bought the car, got the job, or what have you. What is the mechanism by which, let's say, a child who is born into domestic violence or a dog that gets kicked?
That's right, exactly.
How does one verify the past karma that led to that ripening?
What do you mean by verify, Sam?
So, like, I can, let's say, if I analyze the something that I perceive to be suffering, like I don't like my boss, I can say that actually I'm the cause of this because I'm the one who chose the job and I thought it was delicious, and I treated it as such for such a long time, and then all of a sudden I don't like my boss anymore.
Okay, so the level of responsibility you're describing is the volition of choosing now. That's how you're describing it. Okay, the karmic one is deeper than that. The karmic one is that we come into this life programmed in the 4 different ways that our karma ripens. The first is we get the human body, and that's that child, due to virtue, has got a human body, the won the lottery. So that's not just in this life making choices, but the last life, Som, due to your virtue, you got a human body. Second way your karma ripens is your program. You come at the first second of conception completely programmed with all your mental tendencies. Whether you're Hitler or Mother Teresa, you've got your own tendencies to be loving, kind, good at football, music, generosity, you name it, positive or negative. That the level of responsibility we're talking here is you brought it with you from past life. That level that you're talking about as an adult is perfectly fine, but it's a much more broad level we're discussing. But purposely, I also want to use the example, because we only ever ask the question, why do bad things happen, which is you're implying the child who gets born. But what about, Som? Did you have a good family? Your mummy was kind to you? Your daddy was kind to you?
Oh, yes, very much.
Okay, so let's use Som as our example, darling.
Okay.
So Som, due to virtue, gets born as a human. He won the lottery, like a miracle, due to non-killing karma, probably practice, as Lama Zopa says, in the context of living in a practice of spiritual practice, probably living in the context of vows, living in vows of ethics. That's why you get a human body. But 2, look at your mind. You've got fairly good, you don't run around raping and killing too many people, I can think. You've got fairly good tendencies. You want to be a nice guy. You're trying to practice ethics. That's all due to your past actions of practicing exactly those things. Amazing. Now, third Som, called experiences similar to the cause. This is because we're all social beings. You get born to a certain mother and a certain father, and you have conditions in your life. You probably had a life where the money was reasonable, and you had a good education and good food and a nice house. Every tiny one of those, Som, you created the cause, baby, from being kind and loving and virtuous and generous. How come you got money in the bank as a child? Because of your past generosity. You got born to parents who had money. How come you have a mother who's gentle and kind? Because you were kind and gentle to her. How come you have a father who's a good father? Because you were kind to him. So you then you flip it over for the child who's got an abusive parent. But we usually only tend to ask it when it's the abuse. But we take the good for granted. But you caused every tiny one of those good things to happen. And when you can own the good things, it's not that difficult to own the bad. So you can't verify on the face of it, Som, because we're not clairvoyant yet. But this is the hypothesis and this is the theory. So all we can do is take the theory. So the logic is, if karma is the law that runs the universe, every single being's experience, this third kind of karma, is called experiences similar to the cause. Whatever happens to us, however we're seen, however we're treated, lied to, stolen from, killed, loved, been generous to, seen as kind, believed, not believed, every tiny thing at the hands of others, that is called the experiences similar to the cause. So the bad stuff is usually the only one we always ask questions about, but we take the good for granted, which shows how deep this attachment is. It's the hubris of I deserve the good, so we don't think there's a cause. But when we can really own responsibility, from theoretically, because we're not clairvoyant yet, Som, that you created every tiny condition of this life. There's no accident you got the life you've got, and therefore no accident when the bad things happen either. That's the way we have to look at it. It's the bigger picture. So as a child, of course, there's no volition in this life. That's why it's so shocking to us when children get abused, because we can see there's nothing they can do about it. But that's the tragedy of karma. Equally, the child who gets a happy life, but the hubris again is, kids deserve good parents. I'm sorry, we create the cause for whatever parents we get. And it kind of sounds brutal because we have an assumption that we all deserve only the good and don't deserve the bad. But the karmic view is we all create the cause for everything. We all get what we created. And it's painful. Of course it's painful. Of course it's hard if it's the bad stuff. Do you understand my point, Som?
Yes. Thank you very much for the explanation.
So when as a child, the best we can do is the compassion side and help a person. A child can do very little, but it depends on the child. Some kids are pretty brilliant. Some kids understand you talk to any of us. When I was a child and my father was abusive, even as a child, Som, I had some compassion for my father. How fortunate I was. That's due to my past practice, that even when my father abused me, I had compassion for my father.
Wow.
Do you see my point? Aren't I lucky?
Yes.
Aren't I fortunate? Okay, at some point I hated him, but I always had compassion for my father. So I didn't suffer that badly. So that even that's possible as a child. Don't underestimate children's minds. Do you understand my point?
Yes, that's quite amazing.
I mean, it's fortunate. I'm just fortunate, isn't it? I'm fortunate. I love my daddy, you know. Even though at the time it was a bit torturous, but still, I had compassion. I always could see he suffered. How fortunate, I'm trying to get at how fortunate I was that due to my past practice, I was able to have compassion for this man who was abusing me, you know. Do you understand?
I see. Yes.
And that's possible. I mean, many children are like this. And don't we just assume if a father abuses a child, you have to be angry and miserable. Not true. It's just not true, Som. And you also can see some children with the best mother and the best father are the meanest, most nasty, resentful children on the planet. You can't blame the parents for that because they get born with that in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
So we often insult children because we assume we're all these little innocent angels that then get molded into monsters or saints by our parents. It's a very naive view from the Buddhist perspective, quite frankly. I know lots of children who've had suffering and who adore their parents and forgive them easily. I know many people like that, but we can't explain it in the West. Do you understand?
Yes. It's really helpful to look at it the other way around.
Exactly.
And look at,
That's right,
very,
Simon.
very helpful.
We always take the good for granted. That's why I say I've never, ever, ever, ever had a person ask me the question, Robina, why do good things happen? Only ever ask the bad, and that has to tell us that we think we don't deserve the bad. That's why we ask. And the good, we assume so deeply that we deserve the good, we don't even think there's a cause. Do you understand?
That's really funny. I've
It
never
is
thought
funny.
of it
It's
that way.
hilarious. It's outrageous. It's shocking. But that's how we are. Our assumptions are very deep, you know. It all just points to the attachment and aversion, their assumptions. It's very fascinating.
Fascinating. Thank you very much. I really
good,
appreciate it.
Good song. What else, people?
We actually have 3 questions
Good.
lined up. John B. is next.
Good. Please talk to me.
Am I on?
Hello, John. Happy to see you.
Happy to see you also.
Yes.
I'm so glad we're talking about this tonight because this is something that I read my first Dharma book in 1989, and I've wrestled with this question all this time.
Good.
And it's only come into more focus in the last few years. I had a very fortunate birth.
Yes.
I'm, born with all of my faculties,
Sure.
and society never punished me, and
Right. Yep, exactly.
whatever. I was lucky.
Exactly.
And maybe not lucky. I was
Not
fortunate.
lucky. You created
But
the
how-
cause from virtue. You owned it.
Thank-
You earned it. They're your veggies and they're your roses and it's your garden and you should rejoice every day.
And I do.
Good.
But I guess putting the discussion of karma in a larger sort of cultural context,
Yes.
especially in this day and age,
Yep.
where we have the Me Too movement,
That's
where we
right.
have the Black Lives Matter
Sure.
movement, where
Yes.
we have, we had lynchings, we
Yes.
had, so the question that always comes up for me is every single Black person that got lynched, every single George Floyd that got a knee on the neck, every single woman that was abused by a man, killed by her jealous
That's right.
boyfriend,
Yeah.
on and on and on.
Yes, that's right.
All of those people, all of that happened because of their
Yes.
personal
Yes.
past karma.
Yes, it couldn't happen otherwise. See, they talk about karma like a natural law. So we get this when it comes to science. We understand that botany, even if we don't understand botany, we know it's a natural law. And we know that once a law is in place and we've articulated the law, we know it's coherent and it applies every time. No matter how shocking, we know it's just the way laws are. So this is the point here, because I think, John, we have such a deep assumption of punishment and reward. This is the problem why we find it hard to accept this, because we assume it's punishment and reward, and that's the usual view. And with respect, the created religions, it is that God is the boss by definition. And I was a devoted Catholic. I'm not being rude. I know there are subtle levels of understanding the view of God, but basically the view in the ego's view, John, is punishment and reward. So implicit in your question, in your point, is therefore, if all these innocent women and innocent Black people must have done something bad in the past, it sounds like heavy punishment. But in Buddhism, there is no punisher. There is no rewarder. And when we understand karma, first for ourselves, when we hear about people suffering, we only have unbearable compassion, not, oh my God, they must have been bad people, because every one of us is in the same boat. We have had countless lives, and every millisecond of whatever we do brings results similar to that. It's just the way life is. So if we think this life of a person who's, let's say, a rapist, then who do you think the rapist will become in the next life? They will be the victim of rape. But we don't like hearing this because we want to have compassion for the innocent victim, and we want to have anger for the naughty person. This is so deep in our mind. The dualistic view of punishment and reward is so heavy, we can't hear it outside of that. It's too shocking for us.
When we put it on a larger scale, though, we talk about something like systematic racism.
That's right.
So what are we as Buddhists supposed to do about systematic racism?
You try to change it. I mean, look at the Tibetans. You see, John, look at the Tibetans. It's such a perfect example. 6 million people slaughtered. Still, the Dalai Lama's in tears every day when his Tibetan people come across the mountains from being abused and raped and attacked and murdered. A sixth of the population have been slaughtered. So again, the point of the Tibetans, because karma has been in their bones for 1,200 years, and it's been in Asia, it's the default view, or it has been now, but most Asians now are materialists, but the default philosophical view of the universe in Asia is karma. It was been around from India for 3,000 years. So in the same way that the materialist view of we're all made by our mummy and daddy, and we've got the ego's view that we're all innocent victims and didn't ask to get born, that's deep in our bones. Karma is deep in their bones. It's just they know it from the time they're born. So this is why they don't have much anger. And so that's why I always tell this story of this. In 2003, Richard Gere invited His Holiness to New York to teach. And of course, not of course, but at the same time, he invited a bunch of former prisoners, and he invited about 20 former prisoners, all of whom had done some kind of meditation in prison. And so he invited people like me as well, who were working with people in prison. I was running the prison project in San Francisco. So about 20 prisoners and a bunch of people like me, they had all day talk. They met His Holiness, and it was a wonderful day, so moving. All these prisoners, right, meeting His Holiness. But Richard also invited 2 young Tibetan nuns who'd been imprisoned in Tibet and sexually abused and tortured. So they were telling their experiences. And this is my point now about how deep these views are in the mind. So normally all the Americans, black, white, Puerto Rican, male, female, the whole cross-section of Americans, with their usual suffering of politics and racism. I mean, yes, it's real suffering. The Tibetans is real suffering, John. There's no contradiction. But the Tibetans, because the view of karma is in their bones, they don't even learn it later. We learn it and we can't even hear it. It's just implicit for them. And this is why they don't have much anger. So it was so evident to all the Americans. First of all, these young women didn't have anger. And that's very weird for us in our culture. So again, if we analyze the psychology of anger like I did before, anger is the assumption that I don't deserve bad things, isn't it? Do you agree? That's how dare that happen? And that's the basis of our compassion for other people when they're innocent. How dare that happen to that woman? She didn't do anything to deserve it. So in other words, our compassion is based upon whether you're an innocent victim. If we see, a rapist get harmed, we go, he deserves it. Let him suffer. Look at our view, So our assumptions are very deep. But these young women, sexually abused, tortured for a couple of years, right? But when they told their story, there wasn't anger. Now, we can't even work that out. That's because they so have the view of karma deep in their bones. They know why it's happening. They don't have to ask. They don't tear their hair out going, why is this happening to us? We don't deserve it. And that's why we suffer so badly. And that's the basis of our compassion for others. How dare these innocent women get harmed? How dare these black people get harmed? So we have compassion, which is true, but it's based on as long as they're innocent victims. And so in other words, it's really faulty basis. Whereas these young women know why it's happened. Therefore, they're not angry. They work with it. And they even said at the end, one of them they were in tears, and she said, and of course, we had compassion for our torturers because we knew we must have harmed them in the past, and because we know they will suffer in the future for what they've done. So when you have that view in your bones, of the view of past life, future life, karma, and it's so implicit, you completely change experientially. You don't have anger, because anger says, why is this happening to me? They have a reason why it's happening for them. It's a very different view. So you've got to unpack it in many ways, You get what I'm saying? So that's why if we do have the view of karma, like I said to Som, We own the good things, John. Don't just feel you're lucky. Every second anything good happens, you'd rejoice in your past virtue, kindness, love, good ethics, no lying, no stealing, generosity. You'd never forget. Like every time you look at your garden, you would never take your garden for granted. You would never say you're lucky. You would appreciate every damn cauliflower because you know you grew it. That's the view to have. Then when the weeds come, you own those as well. It's a very different view. It takes time to really internalize it. It's got levels and levels and levels.
I'm still working on it.
Good, that's it, John. No, honestly, that's exactly right. So then the point is the Tibetans, they're the best political activists you can find. See, we again have the view, well, if it's karma, they deserve it. Let them suffer. That's nihilism. The reason the Tibetans got out there and demonstrate. Another story, a friend of mine in San Francisco years ago, Jigdrol, he told me in Kopan, I knew him there 30 years ago, and he was telling me he escaped from Tibet. And he told me about the suffering, about he was in 87, there was this big uprising, the first one since 59, really. And it was all the young monks and nuns who were the radical political activists, right? So he was a young monk, he was 17, demonstrating, and then he got arrested, he got tortured, then he got released. Then he demonstrated again, and then his friend had his head blown off, and he thought he'd better escape this time, so he went to Nepal. Well, since he left, he was in Kopan, he's telling me about this, telling me about how his father, since that time, his father got murdered, brother got murdered, and he was sad. And I said to him very casually, this is like 30 years ago, I said, did you ever get angry? And he laughed. He said, Robina, angry? What for? He said, we deserved it. Now, that's the words we would say. He was speaking very casually to try and explain, because for him, why would you get angry? Because you know why it's happening. Why would you get angry when you know why it's happening? If you get caught from stealing right now, you wouldn't get angry because you know that you get caught because you did something wrong. So when you own the view of karma, you own the good and the bad. And then
I think where I have a disconnect or have problems is when I hear women specifically who are in abusive relationships and say, I must have done something to deserve.
I hear you. No, thank you.
And the abuser says, you made me do it.
No, I hear you, John. I hear you. Let's discuss that then.
My feminist side gets kicked up.
I understand, John. I understand exactly. I came into Buddhism in my own political activity. I was a hippie first, then a communist, then black politics, radical, always radical, and then a feminist, then a radical feminist, then a radical lesbian feminist, and then a radical lesbian separatist feminist, John. I don't even heard of them. I was the most outer edge radical feminist you could ever find. So here I am 45 years later, knowing what you're talking about, baby. Right. So for me, the thing that really, okay, doesn't, whatever, my own past is okay. So this is why this stuff is hard to hear, because when we're in the victim mode is, I didn't ask to get born, I'm an innocent victim. That means we have no awareness. That means we're completely suffering. That means I have so much attachment. That means I get angry, I get jealous, and I go and I will choose the dumbest, most ugly ass male because I'm all needy, and that's the classic victim female, or a classic any victim in a relationship. And then you of course you will get yourself abused, and you will sit there and you'll say, hit me again. Oh, he really does love me. That's garbage. This is completely the wrong view. This is the complete wrong view. This is the view of the victim. This is the view of ego. But this is this trouble. Me talking this way, it's like I'm blaming the victim, and it's so hard to talk this way. But I mean, it's not like that. It's not like that. And it's a quite advanced view to have this view, to get to the point where you so own your own response, you so own your own experiences that you go beyond the anger, and then you can become the best feminist possible. For me, those Tibetans who understand karma, they don't sit there passive. They're the best political activists. They never give up for 35 years. Dalai Lama hasn't given up being a political activist. But they understand why things are happening, and then it's out of compassion that they become political activists, not out of anger, out of compassion. I remember Martin Luther King saying, when I was a radical, when I was back in the 60s and 70s, I remember Martin Luther King blew my mind. He said, it's good to be angry, meaning it's good to find fault. You must see the sexism, the racism, the poverty. We must see it, John. But then you say, what can I do to help? Whereas we tend to say, anger, shout, yell, kick, scream, how dare, and this is all useless rubbish. You've got to get out there and never give up. And Dalai Lama one time, he was in a conversation with a journalist, and the journalist said, well, anger looks really productive. And Dalai Lama said, I know what you mean, but it's mainly from anger, which is impotent, furious, frustrated, victim, really. Anger is a voice of a victim, raging. He says if it's mainly anger, it won't last. You'll give up. But if it's from real compassion, you'll never give up. So when you've got the point about the view of karma, when you've got it for yourself first, which is where we're at here, then that is the basis of your compassion for others. Then you really have compassion because you realize everybody is in the same boat. And they say eventually, John, the bodhisattvas have even more compassion for the abuser. That's exactly those young women. And we had compassion for our torturers because they know even they're going to be suffering more in the future. And so when you this is the heaviest view, but it's profound if we can take care of it and use it. And it takes time, and John, it does take time because a lot of stuff, a lot of assumptions packed deep in our mind that we have to start questioning first to get it clear, you know. It just takes a while.
I've got time.
Good, that's it, exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, good. I mean, I've got to be so careful talking this way to women because I'm a woman, and I've been raped. I've been raped and held up with a gun, you know. I mean, so I understand from the experience. But the thing is, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say victim mentality. It's hard to say that because it sounds like you're blaming the victim, and it's not. We're all suffering because we are hopeless. And this is the thing. I remember one time when I was working with the prisoners, and I was in San Francisco, and I was invited by a group of men who you know, guys who beat their wives up in prison, and their anger management, you know. And it was so moving because the more and more I've worked on my own mind, the more I got past the male-female things. That was a really powerful time for me when I was a radical feminist. But when I started to realize we're all human, and when I met the lamas, I mean, for me, that was the most powerful point. The end result, the end part of my political activity was feminism. And then I realized I couldn't keep hating most of the human race. I always joke and say when I was a Catholic, all the non-Catholics were the problem. And then I was a hippie, all the straight people were the problem. And then I was a radical lefty communist, all the rich people were the problem. And then I was into black politics, supporting all the black, you know, the Soledad Brothers and the Panthers in the early 70s. Then all the white people were the problem. And then I was a feminist, all the males. Well, there was no one left, John. I had no one left to blame. I'd exhausted all options. And that's when I bumped into the Buddhists. And I realized that, you know, and then I heard about karma. And that was the thing that was really missing for me in my life. Karma blew my mind. And I realized that if I've had countless lives before, I've been a boy countless lives. Right there, it smashed all assumptions. If I've been a boy in the past, well, then God Almighty, I created myself, you know. So come on, Robina, pull your finger out. But then I realized when I can accept karma, that I can have compassion for everybody. And compassion is not sentimental. It's very wise compassion. We're all in the same damn boat, you know. And without understanding karma first, we can't have proper compassion, not in the Buddhist view. That's why those young women, that was so powerful when they talked about their suffering. And then they said, and of course we had compassion for our torturers. So we can see oppressors in this life. You're going to have compassion because, as they said, they're going to suffer in the future. They're going to be the victims of the next life. We just keep swapping roles. We keep changing roles, boys to girls, victim to oppressor. That's the cosmic joke about it, you know. Anyway, just talking. It's a much bigger picture, and it takes a while to think it through, even intellectually, I think, you know. It really does. But it's a pretty powerful concept. It's a pretty powerful world. It's the Buddhist worldview. And really, without the view of karma, Buddhism would collapse into a heap of nonsense. It's really fundamental. But many people don't like the view of karma at all if they're Buddhist. And that's okay. But as we know with these Tibetans, I mean, in the Tibetan monastic university system, they study it in immense depth. And of course, it's been around for 3,000 years, this view. It's just that it's brand new to us materialists, you know.
Yeah. I never have any problem seeing it at work in my own life. It's
I understand.
Looking for it in other people's lives, and I say, oh, wait, hold on a minute.
That's right. I understand. I understand, John. I really, really do.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, darling. Thank you so much. It's a very fascinating conversation, isn't it, today?
Mm-hmm. Two more questions if you want to continue, Venerable
Absolutely,
Robina.
Of course. Yes, please talk to me.
Okay. The next one, the person asked me to read it out for them, and it's about the relationship between free will and karma.
Yes, good.
We always hear that we have free will.
Yep.
If we come with our own mindset, where does free will fit in?
I understand. But I wonder why people don't ask that with the materialist view. First of all, I want to ask that question. I wonder why, because we say we're coming programmed from mummy and daddy, then why don't we ask the question there? It's very odd for a start. That's my first comment. But my second comment is more, let's look at this concept of free will. I find it very fascinating that actually we should give it its own proper source. Philosophically, it belongs to Jesus Christ. It's not a materialist view, but we've so bought into this concept of free will that it's a Christian teaching, and God gave it to us when he made us, they say. Well, there's no concept like that in Buddhism for a start. So what do we mean by free will? So that's what I even have to ask. I mean, if the person's not there to answer me, but consultants, we have to analyze it. What does it mean, even the word free? That to me is the big problem. The will, volition, yeah, we have that. Absolutely. Every second volition is working. Every second intention is saying, I will do this and I will do that. So we have that, there's no doubt. But why we call it free is a most peculiar concept as far as I'm concerned. Free implies no conditions. It's not cause and effect. It's not a dependent arising, and that's obviously absurd. So technically, free will is an absurd concept. So I'd remove the free and I'd say will. Do we have the ability to make decisions? Well, look at your own life. You're making it every day, for God's sake. So what do you mean? So then you have to then look, I decide I want chocolate cake. I can do that. I do that every day. I want chocolate cake. So what, now put it this way. Free would imply that nothing conditions it. But that's bizarre. I choose to have chocolate cake because the possibility of around the corner is a chocolate cake. So it's a dependent arising. Everything is a dependent arising. So everything is dependent, is contingent on something. Free implies it's not contingent, and the Buddha would say there's no such thing existing. So it's a meaningless concept. And the thing is, again, the Buddha's view, the main reason behind why I even have the thought I want chocolate cake is because the imprint of chocolate cake and wanting it is already in my mind from before. So my wish to have chocolate cake now is contingent upon knowing about chocolate cake and having had chocolate cake before. So there's no such thing as free will. It's a bizarre concept. Everything is contingent. Everything is dependent arising. And why is a person good at piano? Because they've done it before. To say that you've got free will to play the piano implies you don't have to have any tendency to play piano. You just pop it up out of the blue, I'll play piano. Nothing exists like that. Everything is dependent. Everything is contingent. Everything is dependent arising. I hope that helps. In fact, you have a choice because of karma, not in spite of it. But everybody doesn't have a choice, though. You think about it. In other words, you think about this, like also it's a joke to say you choose to do what you do. Check the last time you chose to be angry. Check the last time you chose to be depressed. It's almost the opposite. So why were you depressed? Because the habit to be depressed is so strong because you've done it before. Why do you get angry? Because you've done it before. So if you can be angry, you can choose to not be angry. But you've got to have the tendency to not be angry. So everything's contingent, everything's dependent arising. There's no such thing, I would argue, with this concept of free implying not contingent. No such thing can exist. Everything is dependent upon something before. Whether you call it you're dependent upon your father and your genes or dependent upon your past, there's no difference. So I always wonder why people don't ask this question, because we come into this life program with our mummy's stuff. Just the same concept as coming into this life program with your own stuff. But we only ask it when it comes to karma. It's very curious. So what else, darlings?
We have Lynn and then Mira.
Good, talk to me.
Good evening, Venerable.
Good evening.
I want to know how the Tibetan parents are talking to the little angry toddler that's come into their life. Because it sounds like we have to wait until we grow up to deal with our crap and then analyze it with a Buddhist.
That's where your parents have to be good parents, isn't it?
But what would they be saying? What would
you'd speak ethics. You'd be strict with your child.
Okay, but we kind of do that in the West.
So what are you telling me? What's the difference? There's no difference.
If we see a kid being naughty, we kind of, talk about don't do that but how would a parent help in our culture without the karmic, underpinning?
I don't understand the question a bit. Okay, so
translate this as a parent.
a parent would have, if you're, whether you're, if you have the view of karma, whether you're Tibetan or Egyptian, I don't care. If you have the view of karma,
Right.
which means reincarnation and good ethics. Karma is ethics. So you'd see your child. First of all, Lynn, you would know you don't own that child. You would know you don't bloody well create that child, like what we think so arrogant. It's my child. So you'd see the child more than through the lenses of your own attachment. You'd observe their mind, Lynn. This is the miracle. If you're using this model, when you know your own mind, this gives you the means to look at the mind of your child. So you will know the child's tendencies. You will know if they have a tendency to be angry or to lie or to be kind and loving. So you'd know their mind very well, which is their mind. They came with that mind. You will know that. So then you would know how to be with them. Some kids need to have a long leash. Some kids need a short leash. You'd know their mind well, and you wouldn't bring your own junk into it. If you're a proper practitioner, you wouldn't bring your own garbage into it, first of all. So you have much more clarity. You'd see them more clearly. So, you know, whether your child's a psychotic or a saint, you would know how to behave with them. You'd know how to treat them and train them. Because why? Because you know about your own mind, baby. That's the real piece. Do you understand?
I do. I'm still thinking about how to manage a difficult child.
Lynn, the answer is, this is what you're missing. It's like you're asking me, how does a person, you're asking, how does a person who doesn't know nutrition help their child eat well? They can't, can they? Because they don't know nutrition for themselves. But a parent who knows good nutrition for themselves can then interpret their child's health very well. Well, a person who knows karma for themselves, a person who's practicing ethics for themselves, a person who knows their own mind, that informs their ability to know the mind of the child and to be a perfect parent. We aren't perfect parents because we don't know ourselves, Lynn. So if I'm an angry person who has an angry child, all I talk about is my angry child. I don't even realize I'm seeing that angry child through the lenses of my own anger. We don't even factor ourselves into it at all. That's why we're such a nightmare. You get my point?
I do, but I'm still trying to roll back on what could be going on in a Tibetan family.
Stop saying Tibetan, would you?
Well, I'm using that because
don't use Tibetan. Just say a person who abides by the law of karma and who practices it properly in their daily life. Don't say Tibetan. That's why I said purposely before. So what's the question? Don't say Tibetan. Say a person who has the view of karma, Lynn. What's the question then? Still, if you're not happy, what's the question? What's the question, Lynn? Don't say Tibetan. It's a person who understands ethics and karma. That's the question.
The only reason I say the word Tibetan is how they laugh when you say, aren't you angry? Well, that's a whole culture that supports...
No, Lynn, stop saying Tibetan, because as Dalai Lama says, lots of Tibetans are being born with anger now because they no longer have the view of karma. So talk about a person who's got the view of karma. What's your question? Say the question. What's your question, actually? What's your question? Maybe what you just said, why a person would laugh instead of being angry. So is that your question, actually?
Can I just say a personal thing that happened years ago when I was mothering my kid, who came home with a tale of being bullied. And I remember the first thing I said to her, and this is before I was a Buddhist, and I would, apparently I did it a lot. I always said, well, what did you do? And like, well, what was going on? What did you do? So I'm just trying to, how you own responsibility as a child for your behavior. You don't have to have the analysis of
what's the I hear you, but can you get the question again? Say that. Tell me the question then. What's the question? The question, Lynn. What's the question?
What would you say to a naughty little child?
That's my answer to you before. I've said it several times, but you can't hear it.
No, I can't. I'll have to think.
No. So it's like a child is eating, again, I'll use the analogy. Your child is eating wrong food. Instead of behaving badly, they're eating wrong food. Can you hear how I'm equating those two activities? One child is being angry, another child is eating wrong food. They're both wrong behavior. Just get my point now, right? Can you hear that point so far?
I think so.
What do you mean you think so? One child is showing anger, which is behavior. Another child is eating wrong food. Okay?
Right.
Now, if you're a parent and you don't know nutrition, you won't even know how to help your child, will you? Would you agree with that? So to answer the question, if you don't know nutrition, you can't help your child. So the only way you can help your child who is angry is by knowing your anger and knowing your karma and understanding your practice and understanding your ethics. When you have done the practice, when you've learned mental nutrition, when you've learned actual nutrition, you are now qualified to interpret your child's problem and help them properly. So the answer is you have to do the work first. That's my answer to you.
I do get that.
But that is the answer. But that's the answer, Lynn. So if you're asking it, it means you're not clear yet about your own mind, because you'd know the answer otherwise. You would know the answer, what to do with anger. Because if you know what to do with your anger, you know how to help an angry person. So that means you're asking it because you're assuming, I have to assume you don't know what to do with your own anger yet, because you'd know the answer if you were. You wouldn't answer the question. You'd know how to help the child.
Okay.
Do you see my point, theoretically?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm going back to years ago, you were talking about what it was like when you were little and you were ranging around as an angry little kid. And I think you said something like, my mother didn't know how to help me.
No, I don't know if I said that. I don't remember.
Okay.
That was probably because she does. I mean, I don't remember that. I don't remember that.
No, okay.
But I mean, there's several things, Lynn. First of all, the only person who can help a person who's angry is a person who knows their own anger and knows the tools to work with it, because that gives you the wisdom. Just like if you know nutrition, you know how to help a person who's unhealthy. That has to be the simplest way to put it. If you know mentally what anger is, your own anger, what attachment is, where it all comes from, and you understand karma, and you're practicing every day, when you see another person, you have insight into them and you will know how to help them. So some children, if they're completely insane, the best thing to do is to control them. The best is to be strict, and you tell them what to do, and you give another kid, you give them a hug. It has to be dependent on your mind, Lynn.
That I get.
Well, that's the point. That's the answer. Honey, that's the answer. But that's the answer. That's the answer, Lynn. That's the answer. Because every single child is different. Every person's different. You're sort of like, how long is a piece of string, you're asking me? One child, you've got to tell them to be quiet. Another child, you'll love them. And you'll only know that if you've got some wisdom. That's why the wisdom wing has to become for compassion. That's the point, Lynn. You cannot have the compassion wing until you've got the wisdom wing. That's the whole point. That's the whole answer. That's why you've got to practice, have got to have renunciation first, understand karma, understand your own mind, then you can do compassion. Compassion is not enough. You've got to have wisdom, as His Holiness says. This is the point. Are we communicating?
Yeah.
But you're still not happy.
No, and I'm not happy because I don't see where the point is where a kid learns about karma.
But that when they're what are you talking about?
Oh,
It's
that's
like
what I mean.
Lynn, darling, just please, Lynn, wait, please, Lynn. For
I'm
goodness'
thinking
sake.
about the nuts.
Lynn, dear, please, Lynn, please. For God's sake, you're making it so complicated. It's ridiculous. How can you tell a child about nutrition if they're only 3? How can you tell a child about 1 + 1 if they're only 3? How can you tell karma? For God Almighty's sake, you wait until they're ready. Jesus God, it's just like you're asking how can you tell a kid about math? The same answer about karma when they're intellectually capable of understanding it. Good Lord. That's all your question is. It's a simple answer.
Yeah.
Next
Imagine my doing that with in California. Let's say I was totally steeped in working on my mind, totally steeped in analysis, self-analysis. And yeah, when do I start talking about that to a kid? How old do they have to be? It sounds like we have to be old and sophisticated and looking at the 3 poisons with it. Do you know what I'm talking about? Maybe not. I'm just thinking, what is the transition here for a kid to just sort of feel, oh, karma. Somebody is sitting down and lecturing him on karma or her on karma at the age of 10, 12, 14. Did they have to wait to grow up and go, man, this isn't working out right? Let me find a Buddhist teacher. I'm talking about within our culture. I'm just interested in that. That's all. Goodbye.
Thank you, darling. Thank you, sweetheart. Any other questions there? Jean,
Mira was next.
Who? Who's next?
Mira.
Good, Mira. Talk to me, sweetheart.
Mine was very similar to Lynn's. As a parent, I was also curious about the guidance of if your child is angry,
Yes.
responding to them. But you just said it all right
Yes,
there.
yes.
It was that part about I don't deserve
Does it make sense to you, though? Does it make sense, my answer?
Yeah, because you just said, you know, when they're ready, and you know what
Yeah,
I try to do is
but-
a bit of the.
But the more, no, but my real answer isn't that. That's partly. But the real answer is, how can you help your child with anger, with nutrition, with math, with music, with whatever it might be, if you don't know about your own? We miss that totally in the West. We know that you can't teach your child nutrition if you don't know it. We know that you can't teach your child music if you don't know it. But we don't realize that we can't help our child with their emotions if we haven't done the work. We don't factor that in.
Yeah, no, that was.
That's the point. That's the whole point. If you want to help your child, you learn about your own mind. Then you'll be easily able to know exactly where your child is at, and you know exactly how to help them.
Thank you.
In other words, get your own junk out of the way. Then you'll
Yeah.
be a perfect parent. That's it. What else, Gina?
No other questions lined up.
Well, darling people, what an interesting. This is about how to get out of samsara into nirvana, how to quit the delusions, and we talked about karma, and we talked about the delusions. This is the essence. This is the essence of the causes of suffering, and so how to counteract them, so that we stop suffering. So all the time, you see, we hear it about how stopping suffering. It always sounds so heavy. But let's again remember, if we live in this way, abide by the laws of karma, take responsibility, give up the anger, and get less angry, less attached, how would we be? And we hear about being renounced. It always sounds so kind of depressing. But what would we be like? Well, guess what? Be more accountable, more relaxed, more fulfilled, more content, more joyful, less angry, less neurotic, less needy, less attached, less jealous, less depressed, more compassionate, and more kind. Is this not the kind of person we want to become? Well, this is Buddha's method. That's all. So delight. Keep moving, keep practicing. And Gina can remind me of everything we talked about next week. I'll try and remember myself, Gina. I'm so sorry.
I know, we had so many good questions tonight.
I know, it's so
good
fascinating.
stuff.
It's wonderful. It's so good.
Scribbling.
Getting into the guts of it, you know. So you people okay? So we finished 1.5 hours, gone like a dream. All these seeds we planted, maybe nourish them. They won't go away. They will stay stored in our mind. Maybe nourish them with our practice from the second forward, to continue to unpack and unravel our minds, understand the delusions, understand karma, you know, and grow our marvelous potential so we can be a benefit to others. So we can be a benefit to others. Jang chub sem chog rinpoche ma ke panam ke guchi ke panyampa me pa yang gong ne gong de probasho gewa din yudo dag lama sange drubgyu ne drawa chi kyang malupa jay sala go pa shok. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so
Gina.
much, Venerable
Thank you, Ling.
Robina.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Som. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Much
everyone.
love,
Thanks for all the
Mira,
questions.
everybody. Much love.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you,
Yes.
Venerable Robina. Thank you.
So inspiring. Thank you, Robina.